Adjustment Meeting, Monday, June 14th, 2021. I hereby declare this meeting of the Howell Township Zoning Board to be open. Adequate notice having been given pursuant to the New Jersey Open Public Meeting Act in the following manner. First, on December 10th, 2020, a copy of said notice was mailed to the Asbury Park Press and the Tri-Town News. Second, on December 29th, 2020, a copy of said notice was hand-delivered to the clerk of the Township of Howell. Third, on December 29th, 2020, said notice was posted in the office of the Zoning Board and on the bulletin board in the Howell Township Municipal Building, 4567 Route 9, Howell Township, New Jersey. Please take note that this meeting is being videotaped for possible future broadcast on Howell Township TV 77. This meeting is a judicial proceeding. Any questions or comments must be limited to the issues of what the board may legally consider in reaching their decision, and the decorum appropriate to a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. For any members of the public wishing to ask questions or comment on an application, you will need to use the raise your hand feature when the chairman opens the hearing up for members of the public. Once you are brought into the hearing, you will need to have both audio and video. You will be sworn in and required to give your name and address. If you are on a phone call, you can press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, you may. Mr. Cantor?
Here.
Mr. Hughes?
Here.
Mr. Mertens?
Here.
Mr. Moretti?
Here.
Mr. Orozco?
Here.
Mr. Saya?
Here.
Mr. Stanton? I still do not see him on the meeting. Mr. Gonzalez?
Here.
And Chairman Nansen.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Can we all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag,
United States of America,
To the
republic for which stands one nation, God, justice for all.
Why does she leave? I can't get that.
Okay, Mr. Tropper, you mind swearing in the professionals, please?
Sure. Would all the professionals please raise your right hand? You swear the testimony you'll give this evening and be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
So I see tonight Mr. Cunliffe, Ms. Beam, and Ms. Spiro. Is Mr. Aguiar or Mr. Howard here?
Mr. Aguiar is here. Sorry.
I am here.
He needs to be sworn in.
Okay, all sworn, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Approval of minutes, regular meeting, May 10th, 2021. Eligible voters, Cantor, Mertens, Moretti, Saya, Gonzalez, and Nansen. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, make a motion to move it.
Motion by Mr. Saya.
Second,
Who's second?
Mertens.
Mr. Mertens, second. We have a roll call, please.
Mr. Cantor?
Yes.
Mr. Mertens?
Yes.
Mr. Moretti?
Yes.
Mr. Saya?
Yes.
Mr. Gonzalez? Yes,
Yes.
thank you. And Chairman Nansen.
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you. Vouchers,
I have no vouchers.
correspondence.
I have a bunch of correspondence.
Uh-oh, okay.
Well, first we'll just start with, there's a resolution on tonight's meeting for Diamond Communications. The attorney for that has asked that we please hold that until the next meeting. He wants to make sure everybody reviewed it prior to it being memorialized, and we told him it would be no problem. So that's the resolution off the agenda. The next item is Mr. Alfieri, I believe, is in the audience. We received a letter today from the township attorney regarding the application for Brookstone at Casola Farms. I'm going to move Mr. Alfieri into the meeting. The township attorney has asked that we adjourn this for this evening. And if we can speak to Mr. Alfieri and possibly get a new date.
Okay,
Hey, Eileen, before we go any further, there's a Jennifer that has no like video or audio. That is not me.
Okay,
I don't know who that is. So I don't know if they're in because you thought it was me or it's somebody you expect to be in, but I just wanted to let you know.
Thank you. We probably did think it was you. Mr. Alfieri, do you want to address the board about Brookstone and we'll pick a date?
Yes, good evening, everyone. We did receive a letter from the township attorney requesting the adjournment. We did consent to the extension of time in which the board to act. And we checked with our professionals, and the first available date that we are all available is August 23rd. So we would request, and I'm not sure, Ron, it's entirely up to you and the board as to whether you want us to renotice or carry it to the 23rd of August tonight without notice.
Well, you have notice for this evening. As far as I'm concerned, you've made your notice, and if it's acceptable to the chair, whatever date we determine tonight, I believe we should carry it to. Mr. Chair?
Oh, Ron, I'm gonna leave that up to you as far as.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Okay. Okay,
Yep.
and we'll carry this to the 23rd with.
The only question, Mr. Chair, sorry, is are you contemplating going live between now and August 23rd? Because if you are, you would have to renotice.
Eileen,
That's going to be our next topic of discussion, and no, we are not going before the end of August. So
Okay,
you're
fine.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Sal, the extension of time is through what day and what month?
Why don't we do September 30th, just in case?
Okay, on the record, extension of time granted to September 30th.
okay,
Thank you.
okay.
Ed.
Anyone in the audience here for case number BA 20-108 Brookstone at Casola Farms LLC? This case will be carried to August 23rd, 2021 with no further notice, 7 o'clock. Expiration date, we've been granted an extension of time to September 30th, 2021.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item is to go back to regular live meetings. We've discussed it with the township manager, and we've decided to start regular meetings in September. And this way, nothing right now has been noticed for those meetings, so we can do our notice and then all the applicants can notice accordingly. So beginning with our September meetings, we will be live back here in the meeting room. As of right now, there are no restrictions as far as masks or social distancing.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
I don't
you.
know if anybody has anything to comment on that or.
Well,
The next-
I think, I know there's no requirements or restrictions. I think it's going to be up to each individual, whatever they're comfortable with. They're
Right.
wearing a mask and wear a mask.
Yeah, I believe if you're fully vaccinated, you don't have to, but nobody's going to be checking. So I don't know how that's going to work. So.
Okay.
All right. The next one is on Home Sweet Home. They had renoticed for tonight for request to add a facade sign to their application. I've since received a letter that he's going to move forward with the application and is withdrawing the request for the facade sign. This evening, he intends to only provide a summation to the board and not provide any additional testimony, and ask that there be no further comment or public comment this evening, and the board can just vote on the application.
Right.
Which
Mr.
brings
Trombley?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. My notes and my conversation with Mr. Toto today essentially was for him to advise me that he's withdrawing that part of the application. So as far as I'm concerned, all public comment is in. And as you'll recall, and members of the board will recall, that the case was carried because we only had, I believe, 5 members at the time.
Sure.
And it's a use variance. So that would be appropriate. There's no need to reopen. There's nothing new to be presented except Mr. Toto giving a brief summation and then a vote, Mr. Chair.
And then to go along with that, I sent an email. Mr. Moretti, did you watch the video for May 24th for Home Sweet Home?
No, I tried to get a hold of you today and I was unable to. No, I didn't.
Okay. Mr. Orozco, you needed to watch March 8th and May 24th. Did you watch those videos?
Yes, done.
Yes, so you are eligible to vote. Mr. Gonzalez, did you watch the video for March 8th?
I did, yes.
So you're eligible to vote. So now the eligible voters for Home Sweet Home are Mr. Cantor, Mr. Hughes, Mr. Mertens, Mr. Orozco, Mr. Saya, Mr. Gonzalez, and Chairman Nansen.
How many is that?
7.
7? Okay, so we have a full eligible vote.
Yes, we do. And that is all the correspondence, I believe, that I have today.
Okay, I just want to make a quick announcement real quick. During the meeting, if these thunderstorms move through here and I lose power, you know, I'm going to be gone here. I just want to forewarn everybody, you know, they're saying some pretty nasty weather coming through. So
Okay. Thank you.
we usually lose power over here. So just keep that in mind.
Okay.
Okay, moving forward. Okay, so we don't have any resolutions.
No. And I
Okay.
believe we were going to switch the agenda around.
Yes. That's the UFCO.
Yes.
Okay. Case number BA 2108, UFCO LLC. It's a use variance. Application of UFCO LLC is applicant owner seeking a use variance approval to enclose existing covered front building entrance and construct a new freestanding ID sign along the property frontage. Bulk variance relief is also required for the proposed sign in premises known as Block 93, 1305, 598 Aldridge Road. Expiration date September 2nd, 2021. Mr. Pape.
Hi, good evening. Is my audio clear?
Yes, sir.
Excellent.
We can hear you, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board professionals. My name is Jared Pape. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Heilbrunn Pape, and our firm has the privilege of representing the applicant in this matter, which is OFCAOL LLC, operating as Apple Hill Academy. Before we begin, I would ask if the board's attorney could please confirm that our notice package was adequate to establish jurisdiction.
So advised, counsel. Yes.
Thank you. Just like to start with a brief summary of this application. This subject property is the site of, as I mentioned, the Apple Hill Academy Daycare Facility. This site has operated as a daycare facility for many years. In our research, we actually found the use variance approval that dates back to 1999, at which time it was a kinder care learning center, a kinder care learning facility, and has since been acquired by our client and now operates as Apple Hill Academy. So it's operated as daycare facility for quite some time. This application is limited to 2 items in the minor site plan. The first is an enclosure of an existing overhang over the entrance of the building. And the purpose of creating this enclosed vestibule is to create an indoor space where parents and children can safely access the building. My understanding that the children often change footwear from their outside shoes to indoor footwear when they're entering. So this is where they would do that in space where they're protected from the elements. And with COVID, there's COVID screening protocols that would take place in this vestibule as well. And you'll hear in testimony, there's no change to impervious, no change to the intensity of the use, no change to operations, or anything like that. The second item is a proposed sign that would be installed toward the front of the property. So both of those items do require variance relief. And for witnesses this evening, we have John Plaskanka, who will be providing engineering testimony. Jim Higgins is available to provide planning testimony. We do also have David Feldman, who's the architect who designed the enclosure, as well as our client who is available. I do not intend to call Mr. Feldman or our client, Mr. Gold, unless there are specific questions for them. I only intend to call Mr. Plaskanka and Mr. Higgins. So with that as the introduction, if there are no questions at this time, I would ask that we could swear our witnesses in, beginning with Mr. Plaskanka.
Okay.
Swear them all in together.
Why don't we ask all of your potential witnesses just to be sworn so that we can move forward? So if they would all raise their right hands, please. You swear the testimony that you'll give this evening and be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
I do.
Thank you. John Plaskanka, starting with you, your name, please.
John J. Plaskanka, professional engineer, Manalapan, New Jersey.
Thank you. Jim?
James Higgins, professional planner, Ocean, New Jersey.
Very good. Mr. Feldman? You're muted, sir.
David Feldman, professional architect, Howell Township, New Jersey.
Okay, and your final witness?
Mr. Gold, I see that he had just, I think he was just accepted into the, as a participant.
Okay. Did you hear the oath being administered, Mr. Gold?
I did.
Okay, and so you are sworn, and your name for the record, please.
Stephen Gold.
Very good. All sworn, Mr. Pape.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Plaskanka, if you could share your credentials with the board so they could accept you as a professional engineer, please.
Licensed professional engineer in New Jersey for about 50 years, appeared by many, many boards in Monmouth, Ocean, Middlesex County for the last 50 years.
We accept your credentials, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe this is a fairly straightforward application, Mr. Plaskanka. I think it's important that we just identify to the board what this application is and what it's not. As to the entrance area, this is really just limited to adding a vestibule at the front entrance of the building. Is that correct?
That's correct, plus the freestanding sign.
Correct. And will this create any change in size or capacity to the facility?
No, the impervious surface, the building, everything stays the same. Just enclosing the vestibule, make it easier and safer for people.
So the enclosure is safe to say it's strictly an amenity to be added to the building. And as you mentioned, there's no change in impervious. This area is already 100% impervious, correct?
Yeah, it's concrete underneath the overhang right now. So it's 164 square feet of area being enclosed in front of the building for safety purposes. And then the addition of the freestanding sign at the end of the parking lot next to the sidewalk of Aldrich Road.
And as to the sign, could you confirm the shape and dimensions of the sign?
The sign is a rectangular sign. It's 3 by 8, so it's 24 square feet per side. And its variance is required because it doesn't comply with the ordinance, which requires only one sign for this building. There is a facade sign on it, so that's a variance. There's variances for the height of the sign. 5 is required. We have 4. The size of the sign should be not greater than 4 square feet. We have 24 square feet per side, and it's not illuminated. I think that's it. Mr. Higgins will speak to those C variance requirements.
Correct. Thank you for confirming the shape and dimensions. I know there was a question from Mr. Cunliffe as to the shape of the sign, whether it was rectangular or V-shaped. So we are proposing a rectangular 2-sided sign. Mr. Chair, that's all I have of Mr. Plaskanka for engineering testimony.
Charlie?
Jared, just to add the fact that there were waivers we requested that were outlined, and Engineer Charlie indicated he didn't have a problem with them because of the minimalist nature of the improvements on the site. So those waivers are being requested. They're numbered in his report. And there was a waiver for buffering. Again, since there's no improvements, we asked for that waiver for buffering. And I think lots 3.05 and 3.6 have been consolidated, but if they have not, we will consolidate them. And there was a request for a road widening possible right-of-way. And we asked if that's required by the board, it'd be a 10-foot easement. Otherwise, our sign would be in the right-of-way. So the sign is only 2.8 feet from the sidewalk. And Mr. Gold has gone ahead and stoned the whole area where the sign is from curb to the front. So it's a really nice looking area there now, if you've been by recently. And we'll make any revisions we need to the plans that the engineer has asked for regarding plat details and outside approvals. I think that covers it.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just to add on to that, so there is one more variance with the sign. The setbacks or ordinance requires all signs to be set back 10 feet from property lines. In this instance, it's about 2.8 feet from the front property line on Aldrich Road. Regarding the right-of-way, I would be in favor of the board granting a right-of-way roadway widening easement in this instance. The island that's in front of the parking lot between the roadway and the parking lot is only about 12 feet. So if we require right-of-way dedication, there would really be no way for them to, propose an additional sign there without, having to get approval for the governing body for that to be in, the public right-of-way. So I would be in favor of the roadway easement should this board not take issue with the signage. I did cite and put a comment in there about the buffer relief along the frontage. So the properties across the street are residentially zoned, so technically there is a buffer requirement there. Having said that, we're talking about a very small sign disturbance that's in that buffer, so I really don't take exception to that. I'll let Jen opine as well. Jared, regarding the lots, so there's two lots, 1305 and 1306. Are those consolidated already?
It's our understanding that they are consolidated.
Okay, so I would just ask if they aren't, that, or if they are, just provide a copy of the deed of consolidation, just so we have it for the record, and if not, that'll be a condition of the approval. I also just want to note for the board's record, and then also for the applicant's record, 1304, I also believe is listed as common ownership. And I just note that for, we have a lot of these applications where, boards, applicants get approval, and then they go and do things onto the neighboring property thinking that they have a right to do that. And it causes issues for them later from the board's perspective, especially with the use variance already being sought for this. So I just want to note for the applicant that any expansion onto that lot would need use and a site plan approval, just so there's not any inadvertent tree clearing or, expansion of the rear, playground area in the back. They clarified the sign, site sign, it's not going to be V-shaped, so it's just going to be two-sided flat panel. I think that's modest and acceptable. Regarding the lot area, I just asked Jared that John look into that and make sure that whatever's in the deed and what's shown on the plan is just they match and it coincides. And then I just have a couple minor plat comments, and really it's just about putting the various setbacks from the structure to the side and rear lot lines, and really it's just for the board's record as far as that. Other than that, Mr. Chair, I really don't have anything further. If this was a permitted use and they were proposing to enclose that front entranceway, I suspect that that was something that, the zoning office probably would have approved, in-house, and it wouldn't even be in here. It's just a matter that this is an existing, non-conforming commercial use in a residential zone. So that's pretty much, why we're here. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Charlie. Any questions from the board? See it, no one. Okay. Mr. Pate?
Yes, and just to respond to Mr. Cunliffe, we'll agree to the revisions in his letter. Our next witness would be Jim Higgins. If we could have him, well, he's already sworn in, so Mr. Higgins, I'll ask if you could put your credentials on the board.
Sure. I'm a licensed professional planner in the state. I've been licensed for about 44 years. I've testified before this board on numerous occasions over many years. I've been accepted as an expert in the field of planning.
We accept your credentials, Mr. Higgins. Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Higgins, if you could identify to the board the variances that are being requested and the testimony supporting the same.
Yeah, surely. Well, the major variance that's associated with this application is the D2 variance, since you have a pre-existing non-conforming commercial use in a residential zone, and it's technically being expanded by creating a small foyer or vestibule, whatever you want to call it, in the front of the building. A D2 variance for expansion of a pre-existing non-conforming use is necessary. And the test there is not whether the site's particularly suited for the use as it would be for a D1 variance, but it's whether or not what's being proposed either improves or enhances the appearance or the function of the site in a way that does actually provide a special reason for the granting of the variance. And in my opinion, this does. I think aesthetically it'll be an improvement to the front facade of the building by providing more interest. But more importantly, I think functionally it provides a significant functional improvement to the operation of the facility by providing about 100 square foot, a little over 100 square foot area within which the students and parents can come in. They can get out of the weather. They can change whatever clothes they have to do. If there are still COVID protocols in place, they can go through those COVID protocols and not be in the open air in the weather. So I think there's a significant functional improvement to the operation of the facility. I don't see any substantial negative impact. One thing, when you look at a D2 variance, you look at whether or not there's an increase in the intensity of the use. In this case, there is no increase in the intensity of the use. The intensity will remain exactly the same as it is today. And the proposed structure does not create any new D variances in terms of the building. The sign is a different issue, but in terms of the enclosure in the building, it creates no new D variances, so that I don't see any substantial negative impact to the granting of the variance. In fact, I think there's only going to be improvements both to the function and the appearance of the site. So I think in terms of the D2 variance, I think there are special reasons for granting, and I don't think there's any substantial negative impact. This facility is going to continue on the site whether or not this small vestibule is approved in the building or not. So there's not going to be any substantial negative impact on the zone plan either. With regard to the sign, I think looking at the variances that are necessary collectively, a sign to identify the facility out on the street, I think is important. I know it's been a while since I've driven my children to daycare, but I still remember what it was like getting up in the morning, getting them ready, getting yourself ready to go to work, feeding them, getting out to the car. By the time you get in the car and you're driving to daycare, your mind is cluttered with a lot of different information, and it's very good to have a visible sign out in front of the facility so that if you're riding down the street, you don't, because you're thinking about work or something else, you don't just ride right by the facility. So I think there's an important aspect to having a freestanding sign in front of the facility. And when I look at the site, there's really no other place to put the sign. The sign, there's about I'd say about a 12 to 13 foot area between the sidewalk and the parking area. And where the sign is proposed is in the middle of that area. It's a small sign, only 24 square feet, only 5 feet in height. I think it will aesthetically, I don't think it'll be detrimental. I think it does provide a service in terms of helping motorists identify the site and know where to enter the site. And I can't see any substantial negative impact to the granting of the variances. So when I look at all that, I think that the sign variances can be granted, and I think that the D2 variance can be granted without any substantial detriment.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. Mr. Higgins is available to the board if there are any questions.
Jennifer.
Well, I don't take any exception at all to the testimony regarding enclosing the entrance. I think that that's technically an expansion, but I don't really think the use itself is expanding. So I don't take any exception to the request for that. I agree with Charlie with respect to the easement. The location of the sign in the island seems appropriate because it's equidistant between the driveways. I really don't have a problem with the variance relief that's been requested, and I think Mr. Higgins has put the requisite testimony on the record.
Thank you. Board members, any questions of Mr. Higgins? Oh. Mr. Pate?
As I mentioned, Mr. Feldman and Mr. Gold, the architect and operator respectively, are available. I do not intend to call them. That is our direct presentation. we would ask the board to vote favorably on this application.
Charlie, any further?
Yeah, just one last minor comment. So the prior 99 approval, they were required to provide site triangles, easements for the driveways. I just asked Mr. Pate to make sure that that's in good order, and then that Mr. Plisconka just show the triangle easements on the plan so we can confirm the sign's not in any site triangle. And if it needs to shift it appropriately.
We agree to those conditions.
Jennifer,
I have nothing else.
board members?
Sure.
Okay, at this time, I'll take a motion to
sir.
open the public.
I'll make a motion to open the public, Mr. Chair. Hughes.
Mr. Hughes,
I second it. Already.
Mr. Moretti, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, Eileen, at this time, we'll open the public for questions or comments.
For members of the public, the chairman has opened the hearing up for any questions or comments on the application for Oaf Call LLC, otherwise known as Apple Hill Academy. If you have any questions or comments, please use the raise your hand feature and we'll bring you into the meeting one at a time. I'm not seeing anyone raising their hand.
Okay. Take a motion to close public portion.
Make that
motion that we close the public portion.
Who is that?
Mr. Cantor.
Oh, Mr. Cantor. Okay, motion by Mr. Cantor. Do I have a second?
I'll second that, Mr. Chair.
Seconded by Mr. Hughes. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Mr. Pate, would you like to make a quick summation?
Sure. I think witnesses did a great job of explaining that this is a minor addition to the site. I mean, I think as Mr. Cunliffe mentioned, if it were if this were a permitted zone, probably would not require zoning board approval. But we would ask the board to vote favorably on this application.
Okay, thank you. Okay, what's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
So, I'm pretty familiar with this site, many years. And it's diagonal to the Aldridge School. It's a low level, like the school building itself, the playground behind the school. It's an open area, not densely treed or populated. And, it seems, for me, it's always been a proud ongoing concern that the residents of the town had a place to drop off their children, when their other children were going to the Aldridge School, et cetera, et cetera. So based on the testimony that I've heard, I agree with Charlie and all that he's adding, and Jen and Mr. Higgins and Mr. Plisconka, and that, I don't think there's a whole lot but of negativity to the improvements on this site, and that the improvements that they are making are good with good health conditions that are currently in place and foreseeable future. And, and the sign itself, it's nice to have the sign so you don't quickly drive by it when you're on Aldridge Road. So if all these conditions can be met, I'd like to make a motion to approve it. Over.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Saya. Do I have a second?
I'd like to second that, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to add that I think it's pretty straightforward and a positive change, and a lot of thought put into it. And I'd like to make a motion to approve, or to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Eileen, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, you may. Mr. Cantor,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Mertens,
Yes.
Mr. Moretti,
Yes.
Mr. Orozco,
Yes.
Mr. Saya,
Yes.
and Chairman Nansen.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Good luck, Mr. Pate. Good
Thank
luck.
you all, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the courtesies in adjusting the agenda to accommodate Mr. Higgins' schedule.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Next case Before the board, case number BA 1823, Home Sweet Home Daycare Center, Inc. Use variance, bulk variance, minor site plan. Description, application of Home Sweet Home Daycare Center, Inc. is applicant, and Camp Royale LLC is owner, seeking use variance, bulk variance, minor site plan approval to construct a 146 square foot addition to the principal structure for additional bathroom facility, a 520 square foot addition to the principal structure for additional classroom, a solar roof canopy at the rear of the principal structure, 20 by 40 pole barn in the rear in the rear left cornering of the property, 20 by 20 concrete pad, 10 foot by 17 foot refuge closure, and 4 new parking stalls on the west side property located just north of the existing parking stalls in premises known as Block 154, Lot 13, 321 West Farm Road. This application was partially heard March 8, 2021, when it was carried to May 24th, 2021, with no further notice. On May 24th, 2021, the applicant put additional testimony on the record, and then the applicant was carried to June 14th with no further notice. Expiration date, June 30th, 2021. Eligible voters, Cantor, Hughes, Merton, Saya, and Nancy. Do we have any further certification? So we have 7 votes, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Mr. Orozco and Mr. Gonzalez certified.
Okay, Mr. Toto.
Great, thank you for that summation, Mr. Chairman, much appreciated. And good evening, it's nice to see everyone again. For the record, Walter Toto on behalf of Home Sweet Home Daycare Center Incorporated. And good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board staff, and professionals. We don't propose any additional testimony. I'll provide concluding statements and respectfully ask the board to vote. Again, this is the expansion of a prior non-conforming use. So 5 affirmative votes are required for an approval of this D2 variance. Just by way of a quick recap, the existing daycare facility has an existing number of nonconformities, such as impervious coverage, the pool setback, and the buffer. There are existing intrusions into the required buffer, the pool, canopy driveway, and there is a lack of landscaping and berming. Now, the proposed expansion improves the function and efficiency of the existing use in a number of ways. The increase in parking helps satisfy the needs of the current staff and the visitors, the visiting parents. We're improving the spaces for the children. We're creating shade over the infant playground, providing storage in the pole barn, along with new equipment to support the camp and after school programs. We're providing new ADA accessible bathrooms. And this is important. The bathrooms will be in close proximity to the toddler group, which is at the age at which they begin their toilet training, and providing a new classroom to allow for the infants to be cared for independent of the older toddler group. I would posit, based on the testimony of Mr. Siv, Ms. Campo-Real, and Ms. Coffin, the total expansion is modest relative to the size of the facility and the size of the lot. The intrusion into the buffer are consistent with the existing conditions. We're providing a trash enclosure that has been relocated away from the farmland buffer, and that's a significant improvement over the existing conditions. And again, the classroom addition is 520 square feet. The bathroom addition is a mere 146 square feet. There was a lot of talk in both the March and May hearings about drainage and stormwater management. As to that, the proposed stormwater recharge systems are now sized to mitigate the stormwater runoff for the 100-year storm event. That's for the increased impervious surfaces. But we're installing larger than required recharge systems. So during smaller storm events, the system will mitigate the stormwater and it'll mitigate the runoff going to the existing property. I should say the adjacent property. In addition, will reduce, well, as for landscaping and buffering, Ms. Spiro was at the site and we will agree to any of her recommendations as it relates to landscaping. And we'll agree to everything that's been proposed by Mr. Cunliffe and Ms. Beam in their reports. The reality here, much like you heard Mr. Higgins in the last application, is that this use is not going anywhere. There's no intention to cease operations. But the proposal to expand this inherently beneficial use, it provides benefits to the owner and also to the surrounding neighborhood in the form of mitigating the existing stormwater issues that may be out there. And it's a benefit to the municipality in the way of introducing a new inherently beneficial use, which are the solar panels, and allowing for the expansion of another inherently beneficial use, which is the daycare itself. The proposed activity or expansion rather does not increase the intensity or activity on the site. We're not increasing the number of children. We're not increasing the number of employees or staff in any way. There's no increase in traffic or noise. And the additions, the building additions, specifically the bathroom and the classroom, are far enough from the road so as to be unnoticeable. And like I testified, as I indicated earlier, will comply with Ms. Spiro's recommendations as to landscaping. I won't reiterate Ms. Coffin's testimony. I believe she did a wonderful job expressing the fact that there are special reasons for the grant of the variance and that this does not impair the zone plan and there's no substantial impact or negativity to the public health, safety, and welfare. So with that being said, I would respectfully ask you to approve this application for the reasons stated on the record both in March and May and based on what I've said and summarized here tonight. So I thank you for your time.
Okay. What's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, at this time, based on the testimony, I viewed the testimony of our professionals, but the applicant and the applicant's professionals, I think they did an excellent job. The second thing, which was very important to me, is I think by approving this, we can accommodate both neighbors with the pole barn, and the additional shrub planting should help the lady behind. And the neighbor to the east will be, I think will appreciate the extra drainage issues being corrected. And the main thing is also the dumpster will be moved to a more suitable enclosed area. I think the applicant has a great business, and for that reason, I would like to make a motion to approve this application.
Do I have a second?
Second.
A second by Mr. Roscoe. Can we have a roll call, please?
May Mr. Cantor?
Mr. Chairman, the applicant and the professionals have exceeded expectations in mitigating any of our concerns. I vote yes.
Thank you. Mr. Hughes?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd like to echo what both Mr. Mertens and Mr. Cantor said, and just to say, again, we talked quite a bit about the fact that this is a use that's there, and the issues that were there will be there. And I do believe that the the recharge system and having the pole barn and the plantings will, at the very least, ease up on some of the issues that the neighbors may have had. With all that being said, I vote yes.
Mr. Mertens?
Yes.
Mr. Orozco?
Yes.
Mr. Saya?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
as you know, that the farmland is, sacred in Howell Township. And hearing the testimony, Jen put it eloquently last meeting, this is an improvement. Charlie has assured us that, the applicant only had to go to the 20%, level of drainage, and they're going to the 100-year mark, right? So I think that's going to help our farmland, neighbor. And the fact that we are moving the dumpster from the west to the east is also another factor. And as Mr. Mertens so eloquently stated, working with the tree expert, we're going to make sure the plantings do its job. It pains me, but you know, I'm going to vote yes on this one, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sayah.
Thank you. Mr. Gonzalez
Yes.
and Chairman Nansen.
Well, I disagree. I don't think that anything should be built. I know there's already existing conditions in the farmland buffer, and some of it predates our farmland buffer. However, to put a new section of building in there, yeah, you're moving the trash compactor out of the farmland buffer, but you're still leaving construction in that. That could be moved. That, I don't care what you say, it could be moved to a different part of the building, built, and just rearrange the classes inside the building to stay out of that farmland buffer. My vote is no. And I will hold firm with the farmland buffers. Because now you have disturbance in there, again, that shouldn't be there. So, you know, no.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. We appreciate your time during these 3 meetings, very much so. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we're going to take a 10-minute break.
The zoning board will take a 10-minute recess. They'll be back at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
The zoning board will now reconvene.
Give a few seconds for everybody to get on. Okay. Next case before the board, case number BA 1519F, Gross and Gross Associates LLC. Final major subdivision. Application of Gross and Gross Associates LLC is applicant Gross and Gross Associates ETALS as owner seeking final major subdivision approval to subdivide the site into 20 lots consisting of 17 lots for new single-family dwellings, 1 lot for existing dwelling on Clover Hill Lane, and 2 lots for stormwater management facilities to be dedicated to Howell Township, premises known as Block 172, lots 4, 5, 6, 8, 804, 10, 11, 1101, Asbury Avenue, Clover Hill Lane. This application was originally scheduled to be heard April 26, 2021, when it was carried to May 24th with no further notice. On May 24th, the application was carried to June 14th, 2021, with no further notice. Expiration date, June 30th, 2021.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Salvatore Alfieri on behalf of the applicant. As the board chairman indicated, this is an application for final approvals. We received reports from CME, your tree expert, dated May 17th, which we, and that was one of the reasons we didn't proceed earlier. We wanted to make sure we worked everything out with Cherry before we came to this board, and we have since done that. We agreed to address her comments. In addition, we received a report from your planner indicating that there were no planning comments, but we do have a report from Mr. Cutcliffe that we would like to have Mr. Geller testify to. We are going to agree to address all of his comments, but for the purpose of a complete record, I'd like to have Mr. Geller testify. Mike, are you there?
How many witnesses do you have, Mr. Alfieri?
Only one.
Okay.
Okay, Mike, will you unmute, please, and activate your camera? We'll swear you in.
There you are.
Matt, Mike, yeah, you're still muted. Okay.
Am I good now?
You're fine. Okay, raise your right hand. Swear the testimony to give tonight will be the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you. State your name for the record, please.
Michael Geller, Geller, professional engineer, state of New Jersey.
Thank you. Your witness.
And Mr. Geller, I know you testified before the board when this was approved for preliminary, but just again, for the record, can you place your credentials on the record, please?
Yes, I'm a professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. I've been so since 1980. I have 46 years of experience testifying before planning and zoning boards in the capacity of engineers and in planners in some instances. I've testified before this board before, and I'm very familiar with this case, having done testimony for it in 2015.
We accept your credentials, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Nansen.
And Mr. Geller, before I ask you to comment on Charlie's report, I did indicate that we would address the CME, Sherry's comments in her most recent May report, and you agree that you will address those comments as condition of approval?
Yes, we are agreeing to do the woodlands management in the form of a tree contribution based on the areas of clearing in lieu of counting individual trees at the rate of $35,000 per acre. For each of the 3 sections, there have been calculations shown on the most recent landscape and woodlands management plans that computes the areas of tree clearing and computes the contribution fees. So that will be done. And then the other items in her latest report, you got me out of order now, but the latest report is dated May 17th, 2021. We do agree to address those couple of comments that she has in that report.
Thank you. And now I'd like to refer you to the T&M report dated, what's the last revision you have, February 9th?
I have February 9th, 2021.
Fine, thank you.
It's what is it? E6 on the exhibit list. Eileen, do you want to put up the overall subdivision plan, which is exhibit A17, or do you want me to show it?
You can do it if you want,
I'll try.
or I can do it, either one.
Is there?
No, we're just seeing your everything, not just the plan.
Oh, wait a minute. You don't see that? You don't see the plan?
No.
Okay,
You
you
want me
show
to?
it then. Yeah, you
All
do
right.
it.
You got to get out of there then.
Let me get out of there. Okay. Sorry.
That's all right. Let me just see if I can.
That's just so the board has something to look at to show the subdivision.
Hold on, I gotta. Why can't I get my A7, you said, correct?
A17.
A17. Sorry, 1 second. There you go.
Great, thank you very much. That exhibit A17 shows the overall subdivision. I'm referring to Mr. Cunliffe's report of February 9th as a final major subdivision. This is the exact plan that received preliminary approval back in 2015. And as a final major subdivision, there's been no change to the lot count, the road configuration, or the lot configuration in any manner whatsoever. All of the peripheral buffers and the conservation easements as preliminary approved are depicted on the overall plan as well. Page 2 of Mr. Cunliffe's letter describes the site. It is located near the municipal boundary line between Freehold Township and Howell Township. The overall site contains 40.9 plus acres. It's currently in the ARE2 agricultural rural estate zone. There's freshwater wetlands in the most easterly point of the appendage on the right, that's the easterly appendage, and in the northerly area. Each of those wetlands have a 50-foot buffer. The property received preliminary major subdivision approval from the planning board way back in February 2015 and final in April of 2015 to subdivide the site exactly as you see it. The approvals were granted on zoning parameters for ARE1, which is a 40,000 square foot zone that was in existence at that time. With the change to the zoning in 2007, the property was upgraded to an ARE2 zone, which requires 2 acres in area and a minimum of 200 feet of width. As such, the applicant was required to go back to the zoning board for approval of a D5 density variance since the lot sizes were all smaller than the 2-acre required. There were also other improvements that Mr. Cunliffe summarizes well on page 3, very thoroughly, I might add. And those changes are incorporated on the revised plans. The applicant then got preliminary major subdivision approval with the use variance and the waiver relief on December 21st, 2015. The applicant has had 2 one-year extensions. We're here for final approval of the property in 3 major subdivision portions. The upper right appendage that juts out to the east, that's the extension of Clover Hill Drive, is a 3-lot portion, and then a lot for detention basin purposes, that's section 1. And then sections 2 and 3 are accessed off of Clover Hill Lane by April Court, which traverses through the property and is divided into section 2, which drains in a northerly pattern. And then the section line separates it from section 3, which drains in a southerly pattern. And each of those sections also have their own stormwater management basins. In part B of Mr. Cunliffe's letter, he summarizes the various variances and waivers that were granted by the board back in 2015, as well as the checklist waivers. On page 4, number 3, he summarizes the checklist waivers that were granted, considering that this was previously reviewed by the planning board in the 2000s, and we didn't repeat all of that, so that was approved back then. On the bottom of page 4 of Mr. Cunliffe's letter, he cites 3 checklist waivers that were requested. Item 17 has to do with the preparation of easements and deed restrictions for the different easements and covenants and deed restrictions. And our response to that, all that is to be done as a condition of final. All those deeds will be done to the satisfaction of the engineering department and the board professionals and submitted as a condition of approval. The second waiver had to do with an analysis of 2,000 foot downstream, which I'm a little ahead of myself. One of the changes that were done at final was that with the wetlands approval that was required at preliminary, the outfall from the first basin for section 1 was not permitted to be discharged to the intermittent ditch that's situated in the northerly part of the property. In lieu of that, the drainage was directed to a stormwater basin in the adjacent Knob Hill development. It's an existing basin on lot 7 and in block 17203. And that water was already reduced in volume and quality by the proposed basin in section 1 and then metered to the existing basin. As such, that 2,000 foot downstream analysis was done for that portion only, as previously there had been 2,000 foot downstream analyses for the other 2 basins in sections 2 and 3. And we are agreeing to any conditions that Mr. Cunliffe still has remaining in his reports to some of the minutia of the technicalities of that diversion. And the last checklist waiver has to do with the Woodlands Management Plan. The previous plan was based on the prior Woodlands Management approval granted by the Planning Board. The board in 2015 resolved that we would come back with a new Woodlands Management Plan. As I previously testified, the applicant agrees to, in lieu of counting trees and saving them, there's really no room to do that on a subdivision of this nature. that the areas of clearing have been calculated and those contributions to the tree fund will be done. Where able to be done, there has been plantings around some of the basins, and some of those trees have been taken as credits. There's no credit given for street trees, which are also proposed, but that has been done, and that is in essence our woodlands management plan. So there's really no need for a waiver other than the fact that it's a contribution in lieu of tree counts. On the top of page 5 of Mr. Cunliffe's report, he cites additional waivers that are requested. We're agreeing that all of those will be done as part of a condition of approval. Application to Monmouth County, application to Freehold Soils Conservation, and the other 4 items in item 5 of his report. That brings us to the general items of discussion. In number 6, 7, and 8, we agree that we will do those. It has to do with certain notes to be added to the plan and some clarifications. Number 9 of his report asked the question about the conservation easement. All of the conservation easements on the plan are proposed. None are existing at this time, and those will be described and deeds prepared appropriately. The comment goes on to mention about any prior flood hazard area verifications. The DEP LOI that was granted as a condition of the 2015 approval did not cite any flood hazard area requirements. I would note that the area to that ditch is less than 50 acres, and typically the state would not take jurisdiction on that. So as such, they stayed moot as far as flood hazard areas. They did grant the wetlands approvals and the 50-foot buffer requirement for wetlands. And lastly, the comment regarding 300-foot riparian buffers. All riparian buffers are honored, even though it's not technically a stream. They are honored as far as all development is outside 300 feet from that ditch in the northerly section of the property. Number 10 of the Mr. Cunliffe's letter addresses lighting. The preliminary approval was at that time based on a JCP&L provision of a plan for street lighting. Since that time, the applicant's engineers have been required to prepare lighting plans, and we have done so. The lighting has been laid out consistent with the standards for residential development as contained in land use section 188-121 street lighting. Those are the residential design standards, and they are typically placed at 200 feet apart and 16-foot high colonial type light poles. Mr. Cunliffe notes that some of the lighting, because it's gone to LED, some of the lighting is more intense than is allowed in the section of your ordinance that deals with the performance standard for lighting. That is 188-22. But I believe that that's a function of most of the street lighting in town is of that nature. And we would ask for that waiver be granted if it does exceed some of those lighting levels. The lighting levels are typical of the lighting levels associated with residential subdivision streets, and the spacing at 200 feet apart and the placement of the poles assure that there will be no adverse effects by that lighting. I will continue with number 11 on page 5 of Mr. Cunliffe's report. I believe we did submit and agree to all the resolution compliance review letter. If there's none that are done, that would be done as a condition of any board approval. The board goes on, the review goes on with site grading and drainage items. Number 12, any of the previous drainage comments, I believe, have been addressed. If not, we will address them. That's number 12. Number 13 describes the basin to which we are now directing section 1 drainage. That's the easterly leg that juts out from the extension of Clover Hill Lane. That has been directed to lot 7 in the Nob Hill subdivision. We have done a downstream analysis. We agree to do everything in comments A through I of that report. And we will address all of that. For item H, it notes that the portion of Clover Hill Lane south of inlet 3 and 4 should be included in the stormwater analysis. Not addressed, there was a portion of Clover Hill Lane at the low point of the roadway that still bypasses the proposed stormwater management system. The board should discuss if the applicant should be required to provide additional means of stormwater runoff into development such as residential dry wells. Size for the NJDEP water quality storm. I will testify that those 3 lots in section 1 will be provided with dry wells for the residential rooftop downspouts. And that should address that comment to mitigate the little area between the 2 inlets that's flowing undetained. It's being detained by the basin downstream, but that should mitigate the actual runoff from this particular development.
And Mike, just to clarify, too, sorry, I'm getting rid of you back. The applicant with the proposed improvements, you are removing impervious coverage for the existing cul-de-sac. So even though there is some bypass in the Clover Hill Lane extension, it's almost a net zero because you are removing impervious from the existing cul-de-sac, correct?
Yes, we are. That's basically why we allowed that to flow in the first place. But yes, we are doing that.
Okay. And then Mike, just to kind of hopefully speed it up for the board members here a lot too. So
I'm almost done.
I'm just going to ask you a couple point of questions and hopefully we'll get through it pretty quickly. So, and just for the board's perspective, the 2,000 foot analysis was something that I requested. Originally, the basin discharge for basin 1 went northwesterly towards the ditch that Mr. Geller was talking about along the freehold border. Mike, you said you were having difficulties with getting any wetlands permit from DEP to actually run that outfall to that ditch. Can you clarify that?
Yes, that originally was proposed to run right to the ditch itself, which means in the riparian buffer and the wetlands and the buffer. The DEP found that not acceptable, and we offered the alternative of draining it in a southeasterly direction to lot 7. And that was the reason for that change between preliminary and final.
So, and then the new discharge ties into an existing conveyance system at the low point in the cul-de-sac, correct? And
yes,
flows that are being proposed are very minimal. Can you speak to, like, you know, in terms of CFS up to like 100-year storm?
I believe it's a runoff rate of 0.1 CFS for the 100-year storm. It's very de minimis. It's just a little bit, it just enables the basin to drain.
And then as far as the emergency overflow for that basin, that does not overflow into that same conveyance system. There's wetlands to the south and west that ultimately will overflow into, correct?
Yes, that overflows on site to the wetlands and ditch in the northerly section of the site, yes.
Okay. I have a bunch of just minor, it's clarifications, adding additional spot grades around the perimeter of the basin just to make sure we got the 1 foot freeboard. That goes to the same point with the emergency spillway, making sure water doesn't overflow into the road, into that conveyance system. That's not an issue for you?
We will do that. That's all, yes.
O&M manual, obviously you'll be required to provide that as condition approval. No issues with that?
No issues with that.
And then the 2 big items, the one, obviously when this was before the planning board in 2005, and then I guess before this board in 2015, the applicant was proposing to dedicate the basins to the township. I've had preliminary discussions with the engineering department, and they had indicated they would prefer for these basins to be dedicated to an HOA. Is that something, Mr. Alfieri, the applicant would be amenable to?
Yes.
So we'll create a separate HOA for each one of these basins in the different phases, or how is that going to go? One entire HOA for all 3 basins, or?
I'm not sure how we're going to handle that, but we would do that as part of the developer's agreement.
Okay. And then the last one, just going back to, obviously the stormwater management design goes back to 2005. We just asked for additional test pits and infiltration tests within each one of the basins, just confirming the original design and legwork that was done in 2005 is all in good standing from that perspective. Mike, do you guys have an issue with that?
No issue. I was going to get to that. We do agree to do the soil logs. You mentioned being witnessed by the township engineer. I have spoken to Justin Yost, and although he wants to be notified when they're done, he can't guarantee that he will inspect them, but we will give him notice.
Mike, we can do that through my office as resolution compliance, and then notify us. We'll be there to witness them. That should be a compliance item. That way it's cleaner and it doesn't have to go to the township. It'll be a condition of the approval. Do the test bits, give us the infiltration test. We'll be present and observe them. As long as everything checks out, resolution compliance, you go to the township, and then, it's hopefully just construction permits at that point.
That's fine.
Acceptable?
Yes.
All right. With the lighting, Mr. Chair, I'll just note, that's something we've granted very similar on commercial applications. We've been talking about this for the last 3 years here about updating the lighting standards with maximum average with, because of LEDs. I would take no general exception to it. The only thing that I would just ask Mike to just check with your landscaping or lighting people, just make sure it's all 3000 Kelvin, nothing greater than that, so we don't get the harsh blue light, that you see on some of these commercial car dealerships or anything like that. And then as far as the plat details, many of those items are specific that were also in my preliminary resolution compliance review letter, and a lot of it is just informational clarification items that were agreed to at the time of preliminary, just clarifying the notes on the plans. Have you had a chance to review those? Do you have any exceptions or issues with any of those comments?
I have no issues. We've reviewed them. They're all agreeable. The only thing is the ones that refer to the number of trees in each of the sections, we're doing the tree calculation in lieu of tree counts. Those are shown on the plan.
Okay, but everything else is acceptable, and woodlands
Yes.
management, obviously that will be subject to Sherry.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, that's all I have right now from Mr. Geller.
Okay. Jennifer, do you have any?
No, from a planning point of view, this really doesn't change the planning aspect of the application. So I would defer to Charlie and Sherry. The only comment I would make is that we need to resolve, obviously, Mr. Geller put it on the record earlier. I just wanted to make sure that we were going to resolve the woodlands management as a part of this application and not defer it to the future.
That's correct.
Can we get full screen back?
Sure, hold on one second.
Any questions from the board? Mr. Saya?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
This is something that has been inherited. And, the one thing that Charlie has gotten the applicant to agree to is that the drainage basins will not be turned over to the town. They'll be part of the HOA. We're trying to get out of that business. Why would we burden the town with, that kind of, situation? As we've experienced over the years, these drainage basins have caused us nothing but pain, hurt, and they become very detrimental to the maintenance end of it when we have to touch it and remediate it. So it's better off that the developer be responsible, etc. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add one comment to follow up with Mr. Say's comment there. And to that point, so the applicant is discharging their basin to a conveyance system in Clover Hill Lane that does go to an existing stormwater management basin that is owned by the township. One of my recommendations as a condition of the approval was just to have someone from Mr. Geller's office go and inspect the outlet control structure and emergency spillway and just make sure that those are in good structural functioning order, no significant cracks, there's no blockages with the outlet control structure and things like that. If there are, just, prepare some, a memo recommendation so that way the township DPW, can resolve that. They're the ultimate owner of that basin and responsible for maintenance. We just want to make sure whatever, the applicant is tying into downstream does not have any issues. Is that acceptable, Mike and Sal?
I spoke to Justin Yost about that. He's going to inspect that with us if he can. He is going to have DPW clear away because a lot of that is overgrown from lack of maintenance. And once he does that, we do agree to inspect that and work with the town accordingly. Yes.
That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Mr. Alfieri?
That's all we have, Mr. Chair. Again, it's final approval. We believe we've satisfied all the conditions of preliminary and have addressed your professional comments, and we would request that the board act favorably.
Okay. Mr. Tropoli?
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, at this point in time, we need to open the public, correct?
No.
No?
No. Not necessary, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that's why.
Thank
Okay. Okay, any further questions from or comments from our professionals? Sherry, you satisfied?
Yeah, he provided all the calculations, as I had asked, so they just need a waiver from the board in order to make that payment. But he has them all specified by their phases and lots that they'll be doing, just so, they're all aware of how much they're paying per clearing. But all the information's on the plan, so it's definitely understandable, and there should be no confusion as they work their way through the project.
Okay. What's the pleasure of the board? This is for approval of final subdivision.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Jennifer Bean.
Yes, sir.
Sure.
So Jen,
Yeah.
please, this was what, an ARE1 that's gone to ARE2? Originally, how many homes were?
Oh, I don't know how many homes. It was, the preliminary, Mike, the preliminary was the same number of homes as what we have now, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
So this is just final, like they're not changing anything from what was preliminarily approved. I think it was ARE 1 and then it went to ARE 2, which is why it went from the planning board to the zoning board, correct?
Yes.
But they really haven't changed anything in terms of their plan, and they got preliminary approval, what? How many years ago?
15.
5 years ago, 6 years ago? So they've had preliminary approval, which kind of gives them vested rights for, it's almost 6 years now, right, Mike?
Yes. We applied before the expiration, but it's about 5.5 years.
Exactly. So, and the zoning has not changed.
Not since.
So at the end of the day, from a planning point of view, the subdivision was really approved. The layout, the number of lots, the size of the lots, et cetera, was approved in 2015. This is like, honestly, the only reason that they didn't get preliminary and final back then was because of the woodlands management. They had to come back for final and I don't know really why it took so long, but they are only really back to address woodlands management, which we've gone around and around, and Sherry is satisfied, right, Sherry? I don't want to speak for you.
Yeah, everything's calculated out by the max number.
So, yes.
And then Charlie, what have you done since 2015 in your report that kind of sharpens the pencil on this plan here?
So to that point, obviously, it's certainly cleaner when an applicant can come in and get preliminary and final at the same time. Having said that, there's sometimes, especially with outside agency approvals, when you have to get wetlands permits and things like that, those things can take time. As you heard Mr. Geller provide testimony to, they weren't able to obtain approvals for the one outfall that drained westerly to the freehold, the ditch along the freehold border. That necessitated them to reroute their outfall for their basin. As part of that, because it does drain into an additional conveyance system, and although it is very de minimis in nature, as Mr. Geller testified, I still requested that they take another step and revisit the 2,000-foot downstream analysis for that basin, which they did, and they've agreed to address any additional clarifications and concerns, and then also these other conditions with the test pits, the infiltration tests, not dedicating the basins to the township, but instead an HOA. So there's a number of additional conditions that they've agreed to for that basin in section 1. I will say section 2 and section 3, I believe, remain unchanged. The only one minor difference, Mike, might be the outfall for the section 2. The same thing with the outfall. It might have been pulled shorter so it didn't encroach into the wetlands buffer there. So other than that, everything is predominantly unchanged from the prior 2015 approval. Really, it was the section 1 and an abundance of caution from my end with regards to stormwater management. So.
Thank you, Charlie. So, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
In the interest of good government and, furthering this application based on our predecessors, preliminaries and so forth. I'll make a motion to go ahead and granting final major subdivision approval to subdivide the property into 20 lots with the conditions set forth in Mr. Cunliffe's letter, etc. Over.
Yes, sir. Including the woodlands management?
Including the woodlands management.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a motion on the floor.
Mr. Chair, you putting obviously our trust into Mr. Cunliffe and Ms. Spiro on this, and of course, listening to Jen's comments. I would like to second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Eileen, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, you may. Mr. Cantor?
Mr. Chairman, I am exceedingly grateful for the expertise provided by our professionals on this case. It's very technical, and I think they've satisfied any of my concerns. I vote yes.
Thank you. Mr. Hughes?
I'd like to echo what Mr. Cantor just said. He's put it perfectly, and I say yes.
Thank you. Mr. Mertens?
Based on the finding of facts and because I'm happy that Sherry's okay with the management, tree management, and the other issues are taken care of per Charlie, I vote yes too.
Thank you. Mr. Moretti?
Yes.
Mr. Orozco?
Yes.
Mr. Saya?
Yes.
And Chairman Nansen?
I want to reiterate my fellow board members, but I really want to commend our professionals. They held their guns. They went to bat for the township here, especially Sherry. And I know the board doesn't realize how much behind the scene or work these professionals, including the applicants professionals, Mr. Geller and all of them, sit down and working this out. I mean, they were scheduled a couple of times. It was held off just to get everything where it needed to be. And I commend all of you, including applicants, professionals. Jennifer, Charlie, Sherry, kudos to you. I really appreciate the work that y'all do. And so my vote is yes also. Good luck, Mr. Cleary.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank
you. Okay. Is there any other business before the board? When's our next meeting?
2 weeks,
September?
June 28th.
We're in person, right?
Until September.
I know. I'm trying to rush it a little bit. Zoom meetings can only go so far. But okay. Seeing no further. Anybody have any other statements or comments that need to be made?
No, sir.
No, sir.
To adjourn.
Oh, sir.
I'll make that motion to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
Motion by Mr. Hughes. Do I have-
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Orozco. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And our next meeting is when?
June 28th, 2 weeks from tonight.
Okay, June 28th is our next meeting. I look forward to.
Zoom, right?
Yes,
Zoom.
on Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Guys. Thank you all for being.
Everybody.
Okay, good night all.
Good night.
Take care, everyone. Have a good night.